You guys all for coming. First of all, give yourselves a round of applause for coming out. I am Justice Mendez, co-founder and managing partner of 161 Ventures. So first I want to get a raise of hands. Raise your hand if you're a founder. Great. Now raise your hand if you're an investor. All right, now the first people raise your hand, find the second people raise their hand. Just joking. Cool, so I'll give you guys a little bit more context on us, and then we'll get into the great panel. After that, then we'll go have some more drinks and food. Sound about right? Woo. Cool, awesome. So 161 stands for the golden ratio, 1.61. Mathematicians and scientists say it's the most efficient path for growth in nature. We like to say we're the most efficient path for growth of startups. We host 50 events a year across 13 different cities, bringing in Fortune 500 executives, notable VCs, notable founders. This helps us source amazing deals across many different regions. It also helps us support our portfolio companies by introducing them to potential customers as well as potential advisors. So Simon Sinek always talks about if you could just in the back a little bit, thank you. They say that great organizations are led with their why. So I'll tell you guys quickly a little bit more about our why. Me and Pablo, my co-founder, we met at the University of Florida in 2016. And we realized we were both so similar. We both loved tech. We both wanted to build communities. We both came from immigrant families. But what we lacked was also very similar. We both had zero mentors, we both had zero resources, and we both had $0, which is hopefully everything will change for everybody here. And we realized one thing, we both launched companies, but there was really no community, there was no capital, and there was no education on how to get to the next level. So we wanted to solve that ourselves. And I'm reminded of a quote that I heard when I was a young man. This guy came to me and he said, Justice, your generation wants to change the world. But the problem is that there will be no singular leader stepping up to make that happen. So we realized it's up to us. We started to build a community first, hosting events, and ended up building one of the biggest tech communities in the Southeast. Right after that, we realized that there was a big educational gap. Founders needed more than an outlet to meet investors and just have a good happy hour. They really needed a playbook to get to the next level. So we built an educational platform, boot camps, workshops, executive roundtables. And it was a fun side project. It was a passion project. We didn't make any money doing it, didn't lose any money doing it, but we had a good time. And in 2020, while we were doing all this, something happened to everybody. It was the pandemic. Every single company had to rethink how they were operating. And also every accelerator and incubator had to close their doors for in-person programs. So we thought to ourselves, now is the perfect time to go into our North Star and our long-term vision. Let's launch our accelerator. So in 2020, we launched a 10-week program very similar to YC. We brought in the co-founders of Whatnot, former CEO of Priceline, VP of growth at Spotify, some amazing people to lead different topics each and every week to help companies scale. And within 18 months, we helped 40 pre-seed companies raise over $13 million. They generated $15 million in revenue, and one of them got acquired. And that's when we realized that we built something special. So we came to ourselves, what do we do next? And we said the only way that we could write our destiny is by figuring out how we could write our own checks. So from there is when we launched our Fund 1. We launched it in February of 2022. It was about $4.5 million, backing AI cloud infrastructure, enterprise software, opportunistically backing any exceptional founder no matter what they were building. We've done 24 deals out of Fund 1, and we're still actively deploying. Now we're getting ready to raise Fund 2. But this story is not about us. The story is about all of you in the room. See, what we're building is not a tech event, and what we're building is not a venture fund. It's a movement. It's a movement for education, it's a movement for community, and it's a movement for upward economic mobility. So what we believe that we're building is different, and we believe that we are going to define the status quo of venture capital. So thank you all for coming. So before we get started, I want to ask all of you guys in the room for one thing. $1 million. No, I'm just joking. I want to ask you guys, please meet somebody new, donate your time, donate your network. If you're an investor, follow up, write a check. That's what we're here for. So before we get into the amazing panel, I want to bring up Scott, the co-host from Brown & Rudnick. He's also my lawyer. So awesome. Thank you so much, Scott.
Awesome. Thank you, Justice. Awesome. We've been having so much fun working with 161. It's just amazing to see how much success the community has had and to see such a great crowd here tonight. So thank you all for coming. My name is Scott Smedrisman. I'm the chair of the venture capital group at the law firm here, Brown Rudnick. Brown Rudnick is a global boutique. We have offices across London where Justice and I have had the opportunity to do some awesome events. Los Angeles on the other coast, here in New York, Boston, DC, etc. There's someone here amongst our 300 or so lawyers that can handle almost any kind of legal task. But my practice, and those are the folks that I work with every day, focus on your ecosystem. Early stage and emerging growth tech companies and venture capital investors. So about half of my clients are VC funds. Folks like Justice and 161, folks as small as $5 million nano funds on the lower side, all the way up through $1 billion mega funds on the larger side, and everything in between. We help VCs close capital from LPs. I've negotiated and closed LP transactions opposite BlackRock and TPG and Apollo and LPs of that class, inbounding money into VC funds. And then I represent the funds on the outbound when they do their deals and invest into technology companies. This is about half of the deals that I do. The other half is representing the entrepreneur side of this equation, working with founders from day zero all the way up through liquidity. And it's actually where Justice and I had the opportunity to overlap in the academic ecosystems where we both do a lot of outreach to founders. Most of the companies we work with, at least numerically, are at the earlier stages on that journey. The pre-seed and even before pre-seed, the formation stage through some key academic communities that we have the privilege to work with. Places like Columbia Business School here in New York, where I've been a lecturer for over 15 years. MIT Delta V Lab. I'll be going up actually to Cambridge on Wednesday this week to do a lecture for the new cohort at the Sloan School. I've been doing that for over 10 years. Do office hours 3 times a semester at Harvard. And we work with Yale, with Cornell, with Wharton, et cetera. Best-in-class ecosystems, right? With amazing founders doing incredible things, but at the earliest possible stages. Oftentimes undergrads at idea stage, helping them organize their businesses, launch, raise their first rounds of capital, build a product, get it really into market, get revenue and traction, and then raise from real investors, folks like Justice and others, get the product even farther down the road, all the way up through liquidity. Every year, I'll personally handle anywhere between 5 and 10 M&A deals, ranging from $1 million acqui-hires through $1 billion exits to publicly traded companies. As a firm, we do about 200 of these kind of transactions annually, ranging from anywhere between $2 and $4 billion in aggregate value. Those numbers make us a top-ranked firm, according to PitchBook, for this kind of activity. But we love doing events, which is what really brought Justice and I together, and what brought all of us here tonight. We love to be amongst the community, whether it's in London, it's in New York, it's going to be in Miami. We're going to be doing it all over the place. So it's really a privilege to have all of you here at this event. I'll encourage you to come back as we're going to continue to do it throughout the course of the year. So thanks again, and really look forward to a great panel.
Well, George, absolute pleasure to have you in the building and speaking with all of us today. Just to get a read of the room, how many of y'all are first-time founders? Raise your hand. All right, got a couple in here. So the first question will be on that topic. So a lot of first-time founders, they think go-to-market is just sales and marketing. Ultimately, how do you think that founders should go about all of these processes when it comes to sales and marketing, thinking about systems rather than tactics? And George, what are some of those mistakes that you often see these first-time founders go off of when it is, within that realm of early-stage founders, not knowing what they're doing the first time, having that kind of naivety when it comes to the product market fit side of things? Sure. Can you tell me, what have you seen so far in the go-to-market, especially in the early stage?
Sure. So just by way of intro, before just getting into the details on where we see go-to-market continuing to evolve, I'm George Matthew. I'm one of the partners at Insight, been mostly doing investments in all things related to data AI ML from, call it Series A onward. And a lot of my time has been spent particularly on this big question around product market fit, right? And how do you find repeatable, scalable product market fit? One of the things that I've noticed, particularly as a former builder turned VC for the last 5 years, is that founders, and including myself when I was a builder, you tend to kind of have that mindset of like, okay, if you build a great product, that's all that matters. Like you'll be able to find, go to market after the fact. But I think the best founders over time, whether you're first time, second time, doesn't really matter. Founder ends up really engineering the go to market very early on in the company's life cycle and the product's life cycle itself. So it's not just about sort of building and shipping a killer product. I mean, that gets you to the starting point for sure. But once you get past that initial starting point of, okay, there's something attractive here that you've built for the market, you got to really think about what is that mechanism of GTM that makes most sense, right? And pre-AI, right? Because I think there's a lot of things that are changing right now when we think about the playbook for, call it post-AI. But pre-AI, you had to almost think through is it a bottoms-up motion that you would do from a PLG standpoint or an open source standpoint that would drive the adoption of the product on a consistent basis with a lot of users, a lot of consumption? Or would you effectively do something where it would be more of an enterprise-led sale, top-down, right? I think we're at a moment right now, particularly in this sort of AI world, where the best companies over time aren't necessarily ones that either have a PLG bottoms-up motion, nor a top-down sales-driven motion. It's ones who have really figured out the two flywheel mechanism. And what I mean by the two flywheel mechanism is that you have an ability to find a tremendous amount of usage consumption on the bottoms-up basis of your product kind of being in the hands of as many practitioners, as many users as possible. And then you have a mechanism that enables you to find that real large enterprise sale among the same constituents that are using your product, becoming ones that'll go into enterprise contracts. That flywheel call it the dual flywheel mechanism that I've seen is not something new, by the way. That's been around for well over a decade. When I was building Alteryx back in the day, when Tableau was scaling out, when I did my first investment as a professional VC at Weights and Biases, every one of those companies had figured out an eventual sort of dual flywheel. I think in this sort of AI moment that we're living in right now, there's no way you're going to be building companies that are now scaling the way that they are. I've got companies now that I'm seeing that are adding 5-6 million in net new per month from like a cold zero start at the beginning of the year. And the only way that's happening is you've really figured out a dual flywheel motion. So I'm as much paying attention to that engineering of the go-to-market as much as, okay, did you just build a killer product or not? Both matter. And it's amazing to see when it works. Like I'm now looking at companies that have gone from 0 to 15, 20 million within 6 months of getting their kind of commercial traction in market as we speak, which honestly I've never seen in my life.
Yeah. And you mentioned Weights and Biases. For the people that don't know the company, can you give them a little more flavor on what they do, what's the story, and kind of up until their acquisition?
Sure. So turns out Weights and Biases became the de facto profiling solution for how all machine learning practitioners in the world, except for folks at Google, because they had their own tools, ended up building machine learning models at scale. So anything that you would need to do from an experiment tracking, parameter tuning, version controls, in how your machine learning models were deployed, Weights and Biases became the de facto product to be able to do it. So OpenAI, Anthropic, Cohere, NVIDIA, Meta, anyone who was building any of the large foundation models to this moment have had to use Weights and Biases as the underlying tooling to make that model come to market. It also turned out that it became the de facto GPU profiler. And so when I had invested in the Series B back in 2020, it was about 5 years ago, it was just getting to the first few thousand users. We were starting to see that multiply on a weekly and monthly active user basis. We hadn't really seen a whole lot of monetization, but we had seen a credible amount of folks that were adopting it in comparison to a lot of the competitor products in that market. At that moment, there was at least 4 or 5 different players in that market. It turned out Weights and Biases just ended up running laps around every single provider of the experiment tracking, parameter tuning, version controls that were in that space, and there were names that you probably don't even hear of at all. But about a year or two into it, what we started to not only notice was not only was the revenue accumulating, but we were getting a tremendous number of users that were standardizing on Weights and Biases. So by the time CoreWeave came around and made an offer for a multi-billion-dollar acquisition of Weights and Biases, which has been transacted already, we're still call it owners of Weights and Biases as far as CoreWeave equity, and so CoreWeave went public about 6 months ago. But as that acquisition was made, there was well over 1 million machine learning practitioners that were standardized on WMB. And the revenue had also reached a point where we're going to hit 100 million this year in run rate. And all of that happened because there was this profoundly important product that was built for a specific persona, being the machine learning practitioner. And those machine learning practitioners were absolutely essential for how all ML was built in the last half a decade or so. And that was the reason why Weights and Biases got so big and had such a tremendous exit and continues to prosper in the market as a division of CoreWeave as we speak.
Yeah, I want to dive a little deeper on the qualitative side of that. At the point of investment, what was it about the team, the vision, their worldviews that resonated with you to build that conviction at the time of investment? For, why was this a team that was going to have a multi-billion-dollar outcome?
Well, I'll be honest, you don't know if those are multi-billion-dollar outcomes at that moment, right? But what you do know is a few things about, what a founder thinks about and how they had a different view in terms of where the market was. And in the case of Lucas at Weights and Biases, his view was very much from a lived experience standpoint because he was the founder of Crowdflower. And he had done a lot of work in computer vision and machine learning models as the founder of Crowdflower and did a lot in the, call it, last generation of machine learning operations. And he knew all the things that went well and frankly didn't in that journey. So in a lot of ways, the cheat code for me was he was a second-time founder in a market that was continuing to evolve. What played to our favor is in the midst of them being in the computer vision ML space, the call it most important machine learning algorithm and model emerge, right, which is the transformer, right? So you have now this autoregressive, autocorrelative model that the more data you throw at it, the sort of reasoning and intelligence of the model continues to improve, as of course OpenAI, Anthropic, and others were starting to show. So all of those practitioners were starting to standardize on how do you know there's a high quality model that's being built, and how do you track everything related to the experiments and the iterations that you would end up, call it, working on as the model is being shipped. And if you basically ended up owning that real estate, you kind of owned everything around it. And that's really what Weights and Biases ended up doing. It's it turned that focus that it had on machine learning practitioners that were just building computer vision models, which at that time there was a fair number of folks that were doing that, and really targeted the foundation model builders with the same tooling. And it turned out that all other players in the market, there was about 3 or 4 at that time, didn't see that coming. And Weights and Biases was always ahead of everyone else because anytime a new model emerged in Hugging Face, for instance, the first tooling that plugged into that model was, guess what, Weights and Biases, right? And even though it wasn't necessarily built as an open source solution itself, it plugged into every great model, closed or open source, that were out there. And so it just became the oxygen that everyone breathed in that market. And that I would give 1,000% credit to Lucas for kind of seeing that opportunity. And I think the only reason he was able to see that opportunity was because he had that lived experience of being a second-time founder that kind of grinded it through the first time, saw the mistakes, saw the hardship of building the company that was, call it, not quite at scale for what the last generation of companies and products were, and then just met the moment in the market, particularly as the transformers started to scale.
Yeah, and I want to take it back to more the early stages here, pre-seed, seed, and talk a little bit more about product market fit. A lot of founders are, there's almost this mythical feeling to product market fit at the early stages. Can you, in your own words and based on your experience as an operator and an investor, demystify what you believe PMF to truly be in the early messy days? And also maybe, what are some signals, what do you guys look for as investors versus, maybe even some of the vanity metrics that founders might think matters?
Sure. So the PMF changes over time, and I think the question you asked is what happens particularly on the seed stage and earlier, right, when you're kind of just getting product out the door. One of the earliest investments that I've ever made was in a pre-seed, which we hardly ever do at Insight, but it was a pre-seed company out of Australia that at that point was 2 founders and a dog literally building a vector database as service. It was a company called Relevance AI, which at that point, it wasn't even called Relevance AI. And so Relevance at least started their journey as hey, we've got a great idea. This was 2021 beginning of 2022. But like, there's a lot of vector data management that was needed. It's hard to sort of store and manage vectors. Let's go build a vector database as a service and put it into a cloud infrastructure. Turns out like there was a lot of vector databases that were built in that time period. And that was the first inclination that, okay, good idea, but too saturated a market. The founders were really thoughtful about just iterating and pivoting, at least in the early days of their journey. And they realized, well, we don't want to be the 7th vector database in the market as a service or deployed as software. And they ended up pivoting very early in their journey. And they were like, well, we kind of want to build an app builder. And we think that some of the tools and platform capability that we had around a vector database as a service could lend itself to building a application builder for AI systems. And we're like, okay, great idea. It was early enough. There was a pivot that made sense, and we were very supportive of the founders doing that. They did, and about 3-4 months in, like, well, this app builder thing, it's not quite the thing that we need to go do. What we really want to do is go build agents. And by the way, they said this like in 2022, beginning of 2023, about a year and a half after we had made the initial pre-seed investment. And it turned out like they were just ahead in terms of building the first agentic solutions where SDRs, BDRs, content managers that were effectively synthetic digital workers could be built directly on their platform. And they kept iterating on that incredibly well. King River and Peak 15, which is Sequoia Asia, kind of came in afterwards for the seed round, and then more recently Bessemer came in for the Series A. The company has been growing in leaps and bounds. Today, it serves a lot of major enterprises like Safety Culture, Databricks, Canva as customers that now want to use their product to deploy these digital SDRs, BDRs on their platform. The differentiation over time was that while everyone else in that market is building individualized agents, we're one of the only, if not the only, provider of a platform that can build agents on top of it. And it so turned out that arrived from the fact that we pivoted from a vector databases service to building an AI platform to then building the AI, sort of agent builder on top of the platform. And the company is now like growing in leaps and bounds. We, went well over the first several million in revenue. We'll be somewhere this year, be adding another 10 to 12 in net new on top of the several million. So we'll be somewhere around 15 million in run rate, where, if we had stayed in the vector database as a service market in the moment that they thought that they had product market fit, this would be a dead company, right? And so I think what I would relay to any founder who's kind of thinking through this is your product market fit changes over time, right? And really, the moment that you find that call it lightning in a bottle, that's when you honestly have product market fit, not when you see the first inklings and signs that someone cares about what you're doing. If relevance had stayed in the vector database as a service market, there would have been plenty of people that would have kicked the tires on the 7th vector database in the market, but ultimately that would not have been a fruitful journey. So in those earlier stages, my best advice to anyone who's kind of building, as someone who's kind of built in my past as well, just iterate as fast and as furiously as you can, because that's the only thing that'll matter for you to find product market fit.
Yeah. So I want to take your expertise from both sides of the table here. So from the investor front, what are some of the more subtle red flags that you look for when evaluating founders? Maybe something not so as obvious as, we just don't see a market for it. Then on the flip side to that, what should founders be screening for potential investors that might be red flags on their end, when, especially at the early stages where all money might seem like good money?
Sure. So I'll start with the question of what are red flags when we look at opportunities. I think one of the biggest red flags that I tend to be concerned about early on is not having a very strong true north for what you're doing, and not having a clear understanding of what you're going to do next afterwards. And again, the next afterwards may or may not work out, like the examples that I showed earlier, particularly on an early investment like what Relevance has done. But every founder that I've worked with, at least in the last sort of 15 plus investments that I've made in the last 5 years, it's probably closer to about 20 now, they've all had a very true sense of where they're headed, particularly in the near term, and their willingness to then take input, right, from the market, from other folks that they know, from their customers, and continue to reshape their view to kind of build the next iteration is really what I think has really helped most of the founders succeed. The ones that have a harder time are the ones that are like, hey, I know I'm right, but I'm kind of off because of whatever reason, and just kind of keep waking up every morning and trying to hit their head against the brick wall. Those two might work out, but then you got to be in a very different zone. What you have to be in is a zone of like extreme profitability, just really focus on the timing to work itself out, be very capital efficient, almost sort of bootstrap yourself, and don't actually go raise venture money. I think the flip side of the question is, what should you look for as founders when you were, call it looking at and talking to investors? My general perspective is like, look, every founder has an investor that's best suited for them. So there is this notion, in my view, as much as there's product market fit, there's also founder investor fit, right? It's something that Tiffany Luck, NEA, and I coined a few years back. And I think that founder investor fit matters quite a bit, right? Because if you're just kind of taking money for the sake of taking money, like you shouldn't. Like there's plenty of money out there. There's no lack of like capital. But what you want to do is find founders that really care about your journey, that really understand what you're doing. Ideally, they've done something around the things that you're doing, so that there's something that's relatable, particularly as an earlier stage investor. I think as you get into like some of the later stage investments, the capital becomes even more of a commodity, right? And so at that point, what you want to be looking at, like we're a multi-stage fund. We're now the largest investor from a software standpoint in the world with $95 billion of assets under management. But in those later stage investments, what you want is, well, can they help you build and grow and scale? So in our case, like we have over 250 folks that are operating professionals that work with our portfolio companies and help with portfolio growth, whether that be sales, marketing, talent, business development, finance, centers of excellence. And those folks are, call it the real reason why inside portfolio companies, particularly in the middle stage of growth, accelerate exponentially better than, call it other growth stage investors. So I think in each stage, it really does matter the type of founders that you kind of bring in. Earlier, you kind of want to find people who believe in the journey, that can work with you, that know your market, that ideally has some perspective to help you through that journey. Later, it's mostly about what are the tools, what are the resources, what are the capabilities that a VC or a growth equity firm has. In all cases, the money is the least important thing. The money is always there. Like, trust me, like the world is awash in capital at this point. There's no lack of great capital. It's really who's going to be part of the journey with you.
Yeah. And going to ask a couple more questions here. We'll make it pretty fast. Two sides to this as well. Just general advice for the early stage founders in the room who are trying to build the next generational company. And on the flip side, just any pieces of advice for the investors in the room that are looking to find and back the next generational company.
Okay. For the founders in the room, particularly that are building the next generational company, I would just say, look, this is no better time than in my professional 30-year career to now build something incredible. And I think the only thing I would just mention as you're kind of building something right now is that because everything is so much different than, call it the SaaS playbook that we've known for well over 15 plus years, don't presume that the playbooks that we've kind of built companies with, particularly in the last decade and a half, are the ones that are going to work this next 5-10 years. So kind of rip the playbook or just throw the playbook out as best as you can and just try to iterate as fast as you can get to markets that believe in what you're doing and doing something, call it significant. And if it means pivoting a few times, that is perfectly okay. And frankly, if your investors don't get that, they're kind of the wrong investors for you. As far as investors go, look, it's a competitive moment, right? And like I said, there's plenty of capital to go around. So if you're an investor, gosh, you better come in with a very strong either point of view, differentiation in what you're bringing in terms of portfolio, as well as something that'll kind of give you an edge in the market. So I actively chasing, it's kind of a public record now, just was on Sifted today, Aiden, right, which is an incredible founder out of Berlin. There were 15 term sheets last week, right, on Aiden. And so internally at our IC, they were like, well, who's going into that deal? I'm like, who isn't going into that deal, right? But then you have to have something above and beyond just capital, to go from those 15 to something that would make sense for a white hot round like that. But I would just say if you're an investor right now, just kind of bring capital to the table is not even close to enough.
Yeah. So one last question that I was not going to ask you.
Oh God.
Before I was not going to ask you until you gave me the okay.
I know where you're going with this. Yeah.
Yes. So when I was doing diligence on yourself, trying to prepare for this conversation, I couldn't notice that you held the position of a board observer for one of today's arguably most popular companies, Astronomer.
We are, yes. This is my first time publicly talking about this, okay? Let's go.
Thoughts?
Thoughts, wow. I mean, how can you not have thoughts? Okay, it was a wild 3 weeks. Let's start there. I will say, in my professional career, I've never had a moment where I've been more driven by instinct and action and not having a moment to think about things as what we just went through with Astronomer. It's a pretty interesting lesson, right? To see what happens when a B2B company breaks the internet, right? Like that's just something that you would never imagine as a board member or a board observer in my case. Thankfully, in this particular example, I never wished to be a board observer than a director more than I did at Astronomer, because it was like at any time, any sort of decisions were made, it was obviously the board of directors that drove that, but then to be able to just give good input, to be able to give at least just a thoughtful, reasoned, call it what should we do at every sort of step of the, sort of journey, particularly in the last 2 weeks, was a challenge and an opportunity. I don't think I would want to repeat that again, but certainly something I felt I learned a tremendous amount from. I will say we certainly, I feel now, live in a simulation. If Gwyneth Paltrow is the one saving your company, which she did an absolutely amazing job on. And I think we're at a point where we had a great quarter at Astronomer. Pete DeJoy, he's the Chief Product Officer, is now interim CEO. The company is moving forward. It is probably the most famous B2B company in the world right now. We've certainly been able to take a lot of that energy and redirect it towards what Astronomer does, which is a world-class data orchestration product that's built on top of the open source project for data orchestration, which is Airflow. And it's based here in New York, and they are doing incredibly well. And thank God we were able to survive what we had to for the last 3 weeks.
So was it a PR stunt?
Hell, what? No, trust me. That was not I will go on the record on that. That was not a PR stunt. No, please, no.
So happy I asked that question. We have time for 1 or 2 questions, if anyone has.
How many websites do you think they got that first week?
I've got the data on it. It was, 1,000% more than the previous week. Let's leave it at that.
So this is a question less geared towards founders, but more towards venture capital. For young students wanting to get involved in the world of venture capital, we are lucky that we live in a time with major venture capital companies. So I just wanted your input on what you think is the best way for a student to start getting into venture capital, start looking at companies, and one day be a part of a venture capital company.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of ways to do that, for sure. I mean, there's a number of ways into venture, right? I was mostly a builder for most of my life before going into venture, so that was my route, and I just built stuff for a living. And, as a student, I, went straight into building things for most of my career before going into venture. There are more professional earlier routes to get into venture. We happen to do one of those more interesting ones, which is the analyst program at Insight. We have about 15 to 20 analysts per class. There's 3,000 people that end up applying for that role. And so it is a very, very selective program in that regard. But I think if you can certainly walk into one of those roles, and they're honestly kind of few and far between, that certainly is a good way to accelerate your earlier career in venture. But I would say at this moment, right, if you're just kind of entering into the workforce and you're thinking about what to do, it's just so much better to be building right now, right? I would highly encourage anyone who's thinking about it as a student to just build, because the opportunities to go into venture will be there for the rest of your career. Like those don't go away at all. But I think the opportunity to be part of a rocket ship right now, as those rocket ships are going into orbit, those you don't want to miss, particularly in these next few years.
Thank you.
So I have a question for you, George, specifically. So AI is a huge topic right now, right? Do you think we're going to hit a bubble, or do you think it's actually like we're in a good progress towards like the future we need with AI, or do you think it's just going to bomb?
So great question. I've been thinking about this one a lot. I think the short answer is it really depends, right? And the reason I'm not trying to not answer the question. Let me try to tell you why I think it depends. If we think about, call it AI, I would kind of break it down into sort of two vectors that are important: the accumulation of intelligence and the arrival of potentially superintelligence, and then how this reasoning vector really plays out, right? And let's see what happens with whatever is going to be the August presence that we're going to receive from OpenAI at some point with GPT-5, shipping sometime this week or next week. But it's very clear that the intelligence vector has slowed down, right? And why is that, right? Because we've largely been able to, the GPT-4 model was 1 trillion parameters.
It's like really generative heavy right now versus like agentic heavy, right?
Yeah, and this is where I'm kind of separating between intelligence and reasoning for a second, right? So it's very clear that 1 trillion parameter large language model built on 6 to 7 trillion tokens, which is the last, call it, major generation of models, right? The 4.0 style of models. That was about 20% of the corpus of human-generated internet content, mostly text-based internet content, not images, videos, et cetera. But to now get to a 10x improvement just on text alone, we don't have any more human-generated content on that side. So the intelligence vector, and the generative side of things is certainly starting to slow down, at least for text, and we'll start to see what happens with multimodality. We'll start to see what happens with images and video processing. Like all those things have a lot of improvements. But the thing that's really fascinating for me is the reasoning vector. Because on the reasoning vector, right, you've got now tremendous advancements that particularly have played out in the last 2 years in the reasoning side, that you can build an agent right now, right? And those agents are pretty capable at what they're doing. And by the way, let's agree that most, call it B2B work, enterprise work, happens at an 11th grade level of reasoning, right? And so we've got everything we need as far as intelligence and reasoning to build, probably the next decade or more on the B2B side for, the applications, the workflows, the AI systems, what I think of as almost sort of compound AI systems. So I think that's where I'm most excited. because again, I can see the reasoning vector already being very much here for all kinds of vertical applications and vertical workflows and vertical agents being deployed. On the consumer side, it is very clear that there is a big race towards superintelligence, right? And it doesn't feel like that is going to slow down anytime soon. And certainly it's being led by OpenAI and Anthropic. I don't see that somehow slowing down in terms of the amount of investment going in. It's also very clear to me that the availability of compute right now in comparison to the supply versus demand, right? It's super clear that there's more token generation that's happening on the available GPUs today than probably another 10x increase. And so we're vastly outstripped in terms of what the demand surface is for what is the amount of token generation needed versus the supply that we have available. So if that is indeed the case, we just are just getting started. This is inning 2, not even inning 3 or 4, probably not inning 1 either. But I think on both fronts, consumer and enterprise, there's a lot more miles to go. But on the enterprise, it does feel like we have everything, just about everything, to be able to build this next decade of enterprise systems. And it's going to honestly look radically different from anything we've known in the SaaS world. So that's where I think anyone who's a builder here has an opportunity to, again, reformat software.
Do you think the availability of data will slow down the ability to make that 10-year plan?
So the question was, the availability of data will help slow down. What was it?
That's what you were mentioning earlier, right?
The availability of data will likely slow down the model evolution happening. But remember, there's a lot of private data, right? And that private data is going to be used quite a bit for a lot more domain-specific models. So that's where I kind of see, again, more opportunity in the enterprise, no matter what happens on the consumer side. I think I'm out of time. So,
Thank you so much,
yeah.
George. Give it up for George Matthew.
Sorry. You're the man. Thank you. He's going to ask 10 more. Appreciate
So
George.
before I get some housekeeping, I want to bring up David Wilson from Serious Advisors.
Fuck, I'm really getting. I should have given an intro to him.
So we'll say a couple brief words, and then I'll give some housekeeping, and then we'll go back to networking and some fun.
Great. Wonderful to be here. Just 2 minutes away from drinks and kebabs. So, yeah, David Wilson. I have a wealth management firm, Serious Advisory. What we do is we do personal financial planning for founders. And so the big, beautiful Bill Act was passed about a month ago, and there are just so many different planning opportunities for founders in it. I think many people know about the QSBS exclusion, going from 10 to 15 million. You now have a partial exclusion if you sell your business after 3 years or 4 years. And then more companies are eligible for QSBS because now we have a $75 million asset level. And so, whether it's that or these sort of new deductions or expanded deductions or there's implications on people executing stock options as well or giving to charity. And so the timing really matters, and kind of modeling out what that means for the taxes is super important given the timing really. So I'm David Wilson, Serious Advisory. If I want to chat about these or other planning issues, give me a shout.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
3 last quick housekeeping things. So number 1, I think Scott wants us out of here at 9 o'clock, so let's eat all the food and make sure to drink all the beverages. Number 2, if we use these events to meet great founders, so if you want to send us your deck and what you're building, this is our email, deals@161.ventures. Take a picture, write it down. Also, if you scan the QR code, you'll be able to follow us on LinkedIn. I'll also add all of you guys to our monthly newsletter. Now it's more every 2 weeks, every other week. So you guys will have access to all of our events across the country. We're not doing stuff just in New York City. And then lastly, I want to close with what we always close with. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So thank you guys so much for coming. Drinks and food. Let's go have some fun.
Shit. Appreciate it. Appreciate it.